Hi everybody, welcome back. Tony with Shinsho Yoga, and today I would like to work on Virasana, or hero pose. Hero pose is a relatively simple pose, but that doesn't mean it isn't challenging. It's actually quite challenging for people, especially those of us in the Western world. Hero pose, not much different than how I am sitting now, except I'm using a cushion here, is very similar to what would be called in Japanese seisa, which is one of the meditative positions that you would take, especially in Zen. I'm a Zen Buddhist. When I sit in what's called seisa. You have different ways you can sit. You can sit what's called Burmese, you can sit lotus, you can sit half lotus. You can even use a chair if need be. But I sit seisa, which is where the legs are underneath the body. Now, because you're doing this in for an extended period of time in meditation, we're not looking in seisa when we're doing our meditation to open up the muscles. We're looking to be able to rest in this posture, take this formal posture to be able to do our meditation. This posture is a relatively common Asian seated posture. Most Asians, right, and things may be changing now, but most Asians, especially at the time this started all crossing over, not as large as Westerners, as Americans, usually a difference in size. So how they sat would be this way with the legs underneath us, right, and sitting back to the heels. They don't have the knee issues that most Americans do, right, most Westerners. One of them is size. When you're smaller, there's much less weight you're putting on all of that. You're not as large. Weight has a huge thing to do with it. It's a reason why you can flick an ant off the table and it lands and keeps going. If you and I proportionately were up that high and someone flicked you off something, you wouldn't live, and it has a difference to do with size. Gravity acts differently on larger weight. The heavier you are, the more you're going to, the force of the gravity is going to feel it more. So Virasana can be a very challenging pose for especially those of us with knee issues, and especially for the Westerners, because we're not used to sitting this way. And say in a Japanese culture, even though this is an Indian practice, in Japanese cultures and Chinese culture, they often will sit this way. It's a formal seated way to sit. You need in Virasana, in hero, openness really in the front of the legs. Right? This is where the main struggle that people are going to have. If you have knee issues, if you have tightness in the quads, if you have weakness in the back of the legs, understand that too, that often the challenges that we have with our legs is not just a tightness in one part, but it's a weakness in another. It's the way the muscles balance and offset each other. Me, I have very tight hamstrings, right? Because I don't work on them, and it's something I need to do. Most of my practices, for many years, I was a big mountain biker. I used to love to go mountain biking. Boy, I would walk like Frankenstein when I was done, because mountain biking really gets the quad, right? Biking in general really accesses the quad, can get into your calf, but it doesn't really do much for the hamstrings. So you really start to overdevelop the quad, and then the hamstring, the back of the leg, you develop the front of the leg, but the back doesn't get activated much, and in order for the body to compensate, it tightens. So for me, something I've realized and had to pay attention to and begin working on is really working on strengthening the back of my legs, the glutes and the hamstrings, to offset the challenges I have in the front. So Virasana really requires, because of how we do the legs, this openness along the front, and knee issues can be a challenge. So how do we modify for that? Well, we use blocks and blankets as we always do. Let's get into it, right, without me going much more on and on about that. One of the things I always do in my practice, just as a little side note, if you have knee issues, I use one of these compression braces with a pad on the front. I just got done teaching one of my online classes here this morning, and with that, I do the practice along with the students. So when I'm coming down on my knees this way, if I don't have a blanket available, it cushions it. Additionally, these compression braces help to keep everything together in here, and I have some issues, especially with my right knee. So the compression brace really helps to keep everything together and keep muscles from popping out. So something you may want to think about in your practice if you have knee issues, a compression brace with a pad on the front can really help you out. But if you don't, Virasana, we have options of blocks and blankets. How to come into it without it? Well, you're going to bring the legs together, the tops of the feet are down, you sit back to the heels, and we sit upright. Now, things are a little tight for me here, so this is not overly comfortable right at this point. But this is our standard hero pose. Tops of the feet are down, legs are together, sitting back to the heels, sit upright. Right? Try to avoid, doing this. Right? If you're doing this, I'm going to show you how to use a prop to help you. If you're doing this, right? If you're trying to sit back and you're doing this, use a prop. If you can't do this and sit here relatively comfortably, right? Relative is a term. You're in a yoga class. It's not supposed to be comfortable, but meaning you can't just sit here. At least for a minute or two in the class, you're going to want to use a prop. But the tops of the feet down, the legs are down, we sit back. Let the spine go long. Don't sit like this, right? Don't sit like this. Don't do this, right? This. For me, I take Cosmic Mudra, right? Hands like this. Your teacher may have you do different. I have my students do this. And you'll sit and breathe. This is the most basic version of Virasana, hero. This way. Now, if this is challenging, couple choices you have. The first and most basic is a block, right? You could take a block. Cork one is going to offer you a lot of support, but it's going to be a little hard underneath, so maybe a foam one if you have it, but it doesn't matter. Take it whatever height. I suggest this height. You'll take the knees somewhat apart, bring this back between the heels so that the glutes, so the sacrum pretty much, sits back onto the block. This will give you enough space to be able to keep you up so all the pressure isn't going down onto the heels and not pulling all across the front, and you can get a little more height. If you need to, you can take that higher. You can take that to this setting, although this one's a little bit more precarious, but if you have to, you can do this. What I like to do is use a blanket. And I take the blanket, you get your blanket from the studio, I'll usually like this. And I take it, and I fold it over into my yoga burrito, and then I fold it over again. And then I take this, and generally the bulked up end is going to go towards my feet. And I take that between the heels and the glutes. Now what that does is that just takes the pressure off the heels and the pressing down, and it lightens up the pressure here. It can still open the front of the legs. We don't want this pulling really, really hard, right? We just want to be able to open the front of the legs. So again, I like to do it this way. This is what I normally will do. It doesn't have to be that height. You can take it to here. If that works, if that's enough for you, you can do that. Put the block here. You can also take the block, especially if it's a foam one, place it here and then there. Now that's a lot of pressure on the heels. That's why I use a foam one. The cork one is very uncomfortable there. Any one of those is what you can use to access the pose. Do what is best for your body, right? If you are lifting up in it, if you can't come back into it, use a prop. You can stack blocks if need be, right? Do as what your body needs for that day to help open the front of the legs and keep the spine long. So that's Virasana. A little more of a basic pose, but still can be very challenging. There are more advanced versions where you lay back into it. I'm not going to get into that for today. I just want to show you the basic with the prop to be able to sit into that. Right? Because with the props, there'd be a little bit more we'd have to get into with different ways to do that. Maybe I'll do a part 2. If you want to see a part 2, leave a comment and I'll make one for you. But that's the basics on Virasana. Do what's best for your body. Use the props as needed. If you're having trouble with the knees and the front of the legs, support yourself. And as always, breathe, follow your breath. You do that, you're doing yoga. So, thanks again for watching. Namaste.